everybody. So, I was asked to talk a little bit about our trip to Long Beach, to Gandan Shartse Tupten Darge Ling Center, where Kyabje Sangh Rinpoche was teaching. And his previous life had been my teacher. I met him, I think, in 1980. And I wound up having the fortune to cook for him at that time. And it was interesting because lots of old Dharma friends were at the teachings, and the other person who I cooked with was there, and the guy who drove Rinpoche was there. So, as well as all sorts of other old Dharma friends, that it was really nice to see, as well as new people, meeting new people. So, the it was said that he was going to teach Nagarjuna's Precious Garland. He gave a little bit of teaching. It was very different than I expected. Last year, he taught, and then there were a couple, a few Q&A sessions, but they did, that was it. But it was mostly teachings. This time, it was mostly Q&A and asking the students what they thought about Buddha nature, what Buddha nature meant to them. So I love the Precious Garland text. It's really wonderful. So I was a little disappointed that he didn't teach more of that. But what he did teach from it was quite good. He talked a lot about faith, yeah, and then he talked about how the method side and the wisdom side of the path complement each other and reinforce each other. And he talked about, what was the other thing? Oh, that's all I had written down. Okay. Yeah, but he made some comments here about different things. He asked to speak to the Abbey people as a group, probably because he was having so many appointments. So we all went up. The group appointment was on October 17th, which was the Abbey's 21st birthday. So much to our surprise, Rinpoche knew about that, and in the middle of our time with him, the, the Geshis who were attending him walk in with tea and pastries to celebrate the Abbey's 21st birthday. Yeah. I had expected Rinpoche to ask us questions, but he didn't. Yeah, my interview with him last year, he had asked one question and then we talked for over an hour. But this time he didn't. So we told him about the Abbey and what we do here, and that we're involved in different programs in town and these kinds of things. And then again, we all invited him to come to the Abbey and teach. And he didn't, didn't say much. And I said, Rinpoche, you're not asking the question. I'm a little bit pushy. And he said, well, I sometime in the future I will come. I can't come now because, and this makes perfect sense. I'm really glad he said it. He said, because there's some teachers that I want to receive transmissions and teachings from, because he is a lineage holder of some practices and of the Galu tradition in general. And so being in that position, he has to get all the transmissions. Yeah, usual, people in the tradition don't have to get all the different transmissions, but he does. And so that makes perfect sense, because I think he must be late 30s now, sometime around there. And so the other teachers are getting older, and so, yeah, that's important. But what I did learn was by observing, in the Q&A sessions. I didn't learn so much from that, but I learned more about how some of the students operated. And one thing I noticed uh, was that people, well, first of all, you know that in Buddhism, we translate words and we get an English word that's kind of similar to the Tibetan Sanskrit Pali meaning, but not exactly. Okay, so it's really important when you hear a word like faith or Buddha nature or whatever, that you try and learn what the meaning of the word is from the point of view of the tradition. Well, what was interesting there is one person said, I looked up sentient being in, I don't know if it was what dictionary it was some English, a Western dictionary, and it said a thinking, feeling being. That was the definition. So her question to Rinpoche is, wouldn't the Buddha be a sentient being? Okay, because he thinks and feels. And then Rinpoche said, well, actually, the Buddha doesn't think, because everything is available to him. He's omniscient, so he knows. He doesn't need to think about things. Um, so it was interesting that there was a discussion about that. Uh, and it was especially because interesting to me because the person who asked it was somebody who's been studying for decades, you know, and the Buddhist definition of sentient being is somebody with a mind who is not a Buddha. So the two different definitions for the term, and she was, trying to fit the Buddhist meaning into the definition of a Western dictionary. Yeah, so really try not to do that. Okay. Um, there was another word that happened with. Do you remember what it was? Yes, merely. Yeah. And, again, looking it up in the dictionary, and what was the dictionary? Was kind of, yeah, nothing other than that. Yeah. um, but, as Sangye Kajo, Venerable Sangye Kajo pointed out, when we say that things are merely designated, it doesn't mean that they're nothing other than that or, kind of some weird thing, but that actually there the merely was negating it being truly existent. Yeah. And there was even another word where that happened too. People were um, looking at giving the English word with and not finding it with a Buddhist meaning. Another thing I noticed people doing is they would raise their hand to give a question, and not so many people did this, but enough people did it. And then they raise their hand, they get called on, and then they would lecture Rinpoche. And then somewhere in that, there was a question. So, yeah, it was amazing. I actually, on both of these issues, said something to the group one time when Rinpoche was there, like, oh, try not to do this. So there was one person who lectured him all about relying on a spiritual mentor. Okay, the whole thing from the Lamrim. And Rinpoche had a different view about that. He said, what they're teaching in the Lamrim is for people of a certain level of practice. But you don't start out thinking like that. You start out, and he said he thinks it's good to see the teacher also as another human being. Well, this other man said, but that's not what the Lamrim says, and we should do what the Lamrim says. Okay, and gave Rinpoche a whole lecture about a topic that Rinpoche surely knows much better than him. So that was one instance of it. There was another one where, here's the word. Yeah, the word non-dual that I said. So somebody had a Western meaning for non-dual, means not two. But the meaning of non-duality in Buddhism, okay, it doesn't mean one. It means, when you talk about non-duality, it's talking about a direct perceiver of emptiness in meditative equipoise. That is what non-duality is. There's no duality between subject and object. There's no appearance of conventional phenomena. There's no appearance of inherent existence. That's non-duality. Well, somebody raised his hand and said, Rinpoche, about non-duality. And then he gave the whole spiel, which I'm sure you know very, very well, about how a light wave, about how light can be a particle or it can be a wave. And so that's duality, because it could be one or the other of them, and then just said something about that. Took a long time, didn't he? Yeah, gave a whole lecture. And then Rinpoche said, could you explain it again? And then he gave the lecture again for a long time. And, again, taking a Western word, the meaning of non-duality from a Western perspective, and wondering how it fit with Buddhism's meaning of non-duality, which it doesn't, They're two totally different things. So, so as it happened, after this, I watched this man, and later in the afternoon when we had a break, he and his wife came up and they were asking me some questions. And one thing that I heard many people say to Rinpoche during the Q&A things, or when he was saying, he didn't say Q&A, he said, let's have a discussion. So some were questions and other things. Anyway, what people kept bringing up was, the path is so long and it's so difficult, and they kept saying this to him in different words at different times. And Rinpoche kept giving the most marvelous pep talks to people, to really encourage them. But then somebody else would ask the question again. It was like it wasn't getting through. So anyway, this one man who had lectured Rinpoche about non-duality, said to me, the path's so long and it's so difficult. And I looked at him and I said, so what? Because, okay, it's long and difficult. Who are you going to complain to? Except I didn't invent it, and I didn't create it, and neither did the Buddha, and neither did anybody else. This is the way it is. How can you complain that you don't like something the way it is? So anyway, he was a little bit surprised by my answer, but I noticed he didn't give any more lectures after that. Yeah. So I don't know, maybe one thing influenced the other, What else? Yeah, so, and then on the last day of the teachings, actually it was mostly discussion. And he asked people, what are your views about, what do you think Buddha nature is? So this person talks about that, and that person's like this, person that. Oh, and they're all saying, and Venerable Sankhya Kadro, finally she got the mic, and she gave part of the meaning of it. It's the emptiness of inherent existence of the mind. But I was sitting there and going, I wonder why Rinpoche is doing this, because I would much rather hear him talk about Buddhahood, Buddha nature, than all these ordinary sentient beings who don't know what they're talking about, because nobody gave the exact correct meaning except, Venerable. So, yeah, it was really puzzling. So I asked the woman who I stayed with, who was volunteering, one of the major volunteers at the center, to ask one of the geshis afterwards, like, because one of the geshis was English speaking, and listened, why they thought Rinpoche did that. And the geshe said, well, he was connecting with the new students, and he thought it would be interesting to the new students. And he did that to get the students to think, develop critical analysis, and that he was uh, doing something that teachers sometimes do of pretending not to know the answer, uh, and having the students think more and give the answer. The first two reasons maybe made a little sense. The last one didn't. So it was very puzzling. It's still puzzling to me. But anyway, when we went up to offer katas at the end, I said, please continue to teach Precious Garland. Yeah, so I'm hoping he will. Then a few little side stories. The last day of the, we had White Tara, and I have to apologize to the three of you who were there. I just left without saying goodbye, so I'm sorry about it. I just disappeared. But so I wound up, my sister drove up, and she and I had lunch with Bob, my former husband, and Cheryl, his wife, who my mother introduced to Bob. And we all get along very well. There's no problem at all. And so the four of us were having lunch, and Bob tells us that sometime during the course they invited Rinpoche, because they were staying at a house that, I guess it was like a house that they rented with 4 other people for who were attending the teachings, and it was right around the corner from the center, and Bob is in a wheelchair, so it was very convenient for him. So they invited Rinpoche to come over for lunch, and he came, and they served not matzo ball soup, which apparently Rinpoche really liked because he ate multiple bowls full of it. Okay, then, and so that I found that very endearing, And then Rinpoche invited them to lunch. I guess it was at the center or something. And that, was just so sweet, because last time, um, you know, Bob's been in a wheelchair. I don't know how many years, but it hasn't been that long. But anyway, last year, when Rinpoche walked in the room for the empowerment, he walked right past Bob, but he didn't walk past. He stopped every single time, coming and going, and held Bob's hand and said something to him. It was so sweet. So I was really touched that, Rinpoche continues to look out for him, in this way. And Rinpoche is very kind and compassionate. Yeah. To listen to all these people. Yeah. Partway through it, Venerable SK says to me, if people did that when I was teaching, and I'm going, yeah, me too, Yeah. So, yeah, what I usually do when that happens is I say, please, because they'll go on and on and on, I say, please, you know, could you just make the question one short question so I can understand your point so that I can respond to it? And then they'll usually give another talk, but instead of 5 minutes more, it's 2.5. And then I have to say it again. And then finally, somewhere along there, I get the question. So this is just a little advice. Know what your question is and ask it as concisely as you can, because if you do that, you will get the answer that you're looking for. Yeah. If you go on a whole big thing, you may not. Okay, so that was what I thought I would share with you. Oh, I did go visit my sister for 3 days, and we had a very nice visit for 3 days, which is very good. Um, Her neighbor, who I met last time I was there, wanted to get together with me again. So the three of us took a walk, and Robin's neighbor, whose name is Sherry, really wants to come to the Abbey. So she said to Robin, we're going to go up there next year together. And Robin has been saying for years, I really want to come, I really want to come, and not coming. But I think Sherry might actually get her here, because Sherry was quite determined she wanted to come. Yeah. So it was a very nice visit. It was a little bit funny at first, going from the Dharma environment into the lay environment at my sister's again, and to see how much, because what we mostly talked about, and everybody I talked about there, who I met there, was the elections. And people are so anxious about the elections, and they're so stressed about the elections. It's really something. And I noticed for one moment, you know, somewhere in there, I felt a moment of, anxiety. And then I recognized it, and I said to myself, it hasn't even happened. So getting anxious about it is ridiculous. Yeah, you get anxious about something that doesn't exist yet. So, yeah, so I said that, the anxiety went away. But yeah, just the level of listening to that from people was really something. Yeah. So very glad to be a monastic. Yeah. Um, we might have to pick up Buddha Hall and the rest and move it a few miles over the border to Canada, where it's even colder than here. Uh, yeah, but yeah, we'll we'll deal with the future when it happens. Yeah, and maybe I'm not allowed to say more than that, but you know what I mean. Okay.